Hi, my name is Jared and this is Horror Obsession. Today I want to talk about Scream 4, directed by Wes Craven and what would turn out to be Wes Craven's last movie. Scream 4 is one of the more controversial movies in the franchise. Some people really love this movie and some people really hate it. It's like the pineapple pizza of Scream. And just like pineapple pizza, I am one of the ones who loves it. I liked this movie on release, liked it even more after revisiting it, and liked it even more rewatching it for this video. There are undoubtedly some cringe moments, like when Trevor does this stupid little ha thing.
What is your favorite scary movie, man?
I'll show you.
But the good outweighs the bad for me. Let's start with going through the plot of the movie, because this will be important for understanding some of the satire later. Basically, Sydney grew up in Woodsboro, and the town is now far enough separated from the brutal murders that it has become a bit of a meme around town, with people putting Ghostface costumes on the light posts and having a movie marathon where they watch all the Stab movies, which are the in-universe movies made about the killings. There is a whole new generation of kids, notably Jill, Sydney's cousin, and her friends Kirby and Olivia, plus some movie geeks, Robbie and Charlie. Jill's boyfriend, Trevor, also bounces in and out of the story sometimes and is kind of the Billy of this movie, except without any of the good looks, acting skills, charisma, or character development. The opening kill alerts the town Ghostface is back, and like all of these movies, Ghostface seems to be obsessed with Sydney, who happens to be in town for her book tour. In typical Scream fashion, the rest of the film is part slasher, part murder mystery, part horror satire, with most of the fun coming in either enjoying the slasher kills or in trying to guess who the killer is. And at first glance, the movie could look like a typical crappy soft reboot. A soft reboot is when a film franchise wants to remake the first movie, but since fans get really upset when this happens and overanalyze every detail in comparison to the original, unrelated footage on screen, this creates a lose-lose for the studio, but along came the soft reboot to save the day. Basically, you bring back the original characters, aka legacy characters, and then you introduce a new cast of characters along with them, with the plan being to phase out the legacy characters over time and replace them with the new characters. Since you aren't remaking the original, as the story is technically an extension of the original story, the studios can dodge away from internet losers like me making fun of their movie for being a worse version of the original. It is important to remember that the Scream franchise is fundamentally horror satire, and each movie is a satire of the equivalent movie in a horror franchise, with the first being a satire of a typical slasher, the second being a satire of the typical slasher sequel, and the third is allegedly a satire of the concluding chapter of a horror trilogy, but there aren't really many of those, so that one kind of falls apart. Scream 4 is intended to be a satire of soft reboots and remakes, essentially the most corporatized, soulless, desperate, and pathetic way studios try to milk older films for money. Original ideas are nearly dead in modern Hollywood, and Wes was definitely onto something with his criticism of this kind of filmmaking. There is no doubt that endless sequels and remakes is, unfortunately, a profitable way to run a studio. There is an implicit reference to this with the existence of the Stabathon, the movie marathon at the end of Act 2. There are 7 Stab movies, indicating the in-universe studio had been making a million sequels, but the sequels are popular enough that a whole host of high school kids showed up to watch them all back to back to back to back to back to back to back. Wes wanted to end Scream as a trilogy, and I think he was a bit resentful of the Weinsteins forcing a 4th movie, so this satire exists in part as a criticism of the existence of Scream 4. There isn't a whole lot of new plot in Scream 4, and in some ways it is a retelling of the first movie, however that was clearly on purpose. This was, and still is, the in vogue way of doing a soft reboot. You basically have the exact same events as the original movie happen again, except they happen to a new cast of characters. Wes and Kevin were clever enough to subvert the expectations of those who noticed the similarities between Scream 4 and Scream, which included things like Jenny and Sydney trying to run out the front door and it being locked, so they run up the stairs, the garage scene of Jenny mirroring the garage scene with Tatum, Charlie tied up mirroring Steve being tied up in the opening scene of Scream 1, Trevor in the closet at the end mirroring Sydney's father being tied up in the closet at the end of Scream 1, Charlie and Jill being the killers is a reversal of the first movie, and of course the final jump scare being the same. Charlie being the killer requires some explanation, because the main character in the first movie is Sydney, and her equivalent in Scream 4 is clearly Jill. In order for any of this to make sense, we have to talk about Jill as a character and what her plan was. Jill ends up being one of the ghost faces, but she is literally trying to position herself as the new final girl by copying the events of the original movie. Trevor is tied up in the closet because she is going to frame him. Because the final girl's boyfriend was a killer in the first one, so that would be expected. Definitely killer material right there. Charlie is the movie geek, so the equivalent of Randy, and the survivors of the first movie were Randy and Sydney. Therefore, Jill's plan is to have her and Charlie survive. But then comes one of the big subversions, which is she actually kills Charlie to steal the spotlight for herself. I think Jill has the most creative and interesting plan of any of the ghost faces, and she is the only one who actually succeeds in stabbing Sydney. She is also possibly the craziest of the ghost faces, on full display when she goes through her Fight Club-esque staging of the crime scene at the end. Ultimately, Jill's plan is to become rich and famous because she is tired of not being the center of attention. Her desperate pursuit of fame and fortune is actually intended to be a critique of the Hollywood system itself, where the studios are willing to burn everything down, from actors to writers to creativity to any semblance of artistic integrity in order to try to maximize profits. Jill is a metaphor for this Hollywood system, narcissistic and self-absorbed, pretending to be something she isn't throughout the entire movie, strictly to take advantage of people for profit. Wes is clearly disgusted with the direction of Hollywood and their endless remakes, and the scene where Kirby is playing the phone trivia game with Ghostface and he is starting to ask a question and she just starts listing off all the remakes.
Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, Dawn of the Dead, The Hills Have Eyes, Amityville Horror, Last House on the Left, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, My Bloody Valentine, When a Stranger Calls, Prom Night, Black Christmas, House of Wax, The Fog, Piranha. It's one of those, right? Right?
My main thought watching this was, Kirby, have you ever done trivia before? You can't just list a million answers and hope one of them is right. You're kind of locked into whatever your first answer was. The reason they included this scene is Wes wanted to have her list the remakes that had been made recently to help point out to the audience how inundated the modern horror scene is with remakes. And I can assure you, countless remakes and 2 more Scream movies later, Hollywood is not done. In fact, I would argue this problem is worse than ever. The ruthless pursuit of money at the expense of humanity is a running theme in the movie, also personified by Alison Brie, who is playing Sydney's publicist. She is trying to take advantage of the killings for profit and ends up getting killed in a parking lot for it. I don't have much to say about this, other than the kills in Scream 4 are much better and much scarier than the kills in Scream 3. And this return to trying to make a horror movie was a welcome change. They even comment on this directly in Scream 4 itself.
She's on the cutting room floor.
That's not funny.
This isn't a comedy, it's a horror film. People live, people die.
I mean, the movie is not entirely humorless. Balancing the horror and comedy is integral to what makes Scream movies work, and there is a decent amount of dark comedy, including when Jill is apologizing to Sydney for killing her publicist.
I'm so sorry about Olivia.
I'm sorry about your publicist.
A few of my other favorite lines include the opening.
Of course I don't. Eat me.
You hang up on me and I'll cut through your neck until I feel bone.
Who is it? It's for you.
Or this great one.
It was the killer's voice. From Stab? Or, you know, from your life.
All of the humor is related to killing and violence in some way, which is much more in line with the overall tone of Scream 4. Keeping the humor dark and the kills more violent and brutal works well together and ends up making the movie feel more tonally consistent, which I think is a big part of why I like it. The tonal whiplash of the third movie really takes you out of it, whereas this one just flies by. A couple random things about Scream 4 I wanted to talk about. First of all, Charlie is a good Ghostface. Yes, he gets betrayed by Jill in the end, but he did all of the kills in the movie except Trevor and himself. And they are much more brutal than the previous movies, showing a sadistic and violent nature that is much scarier than the other films. Charlie was a Ghostface for the modern era, where just getting stabbed isn't enough to scare audiences. For example, when he kills Olivia, there are a few things going on. The kill is much bloodier, as Sydney finds out here, but also the killings take place with her 2 best friends watching from one house over. There are 2 cops right outside the house, but none of that is enough for Olivia to be safe, which ends up creating a pervasive sense of danger for the rest of the film. If having 2 cops and your friends nearby won't keep you safe, then where are you safe? To be fair, we find out later these cops are buffoonish, but that wasn't really known at the time. A couple criticisms of Scream 4. First of all, the cinematography is really terrible. The color palette is extremely unnatural. I mean, look at the outside light in this scene. It looks like they're in heaven in a soap opera. There is just crazy glow in so many of the scenes, and it really detracts from the movie, which is a shame because all of the other entries are actually lit creatively, and the cinematography adds to the tone and effectiveness of the scares. Whereas in Scream 4 it is quite literally painfully bright. Another small piece of criticism is that Dewey and Gale have one of their weaker story arcs in this movie, although it does make sense considering there are so many new characters to develop. It's alright, with Judy making Dewey lemon squares and Gale getting protective of Dewey, but their conflict doesn't really go anywhere and I felt like there was something missing from their story. I don't know, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as good as the other entries. Overall, I really like Scream 4, mostly because I think the writing is as clever as any movie in the franchise, even including the first one. The execution in the first one is better, and the characters are better and more original, but the fourth one is a pretty good soft reboot. It provides us one of the best ghost faces in the whole series, a scathing critique of the tendency to exploit classic movies for money, an interesting perspective on the concept of soft reboots at all, and is much scarier than the third movie with brutal kills to match. The lighting is a real shame, and it is so bad it's actually kind of impossible to not notice how bad it is. But this isn't persistent enough to sink the whole production, and the writing is clever enough to save the movie, especially for someone with an oversaturated horror obsession.